All right, just I'll give a little introduction here. So for those of you that are here, you'll notice you're muted and your camera is off. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please enter them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end. I'll read them out to Graham. And for this, I'll be sending out the recording once we have it up on the city's YouTube page. So you can look forward to that probably next week. And I guess without further ado, we can start our fifth and final presentation in the Resilient Homes, Parks and People presentation series. If you missed the previous four, they are up on the City of Charlottetown's website. Now I'll hand it over to Graham Little with IBC to begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, Alistair. And for those of you watching tonight, welcome. And hopefully this is an interesting conversation for you, and hopefully you find some tidbits of useful information as we go through this. Let's see here. So again, thank you to Alistair. I am Graham Little, and I'm with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and we are the national body that represents Canada's home, auto, and business insurers. And IBC members would make up about 90% of Canada's P&C or property and casualty insurance market. Just a quick bit about me, just so you know. I know you're in Charlottetown this evening, and I truly wish I was there with you. So hopefully that will be a trip I can make soon, pandemic considering, and of course vaccination rates and all of the various reopening phases that our government has put in place. I'm currently in New Brunswick, in a town called Grand Bay, just outside of St. John. Our regional offices for the Insurance Bureau of Canada are located in Halifax. So typically, I guess prior to 2020, I would work predominantly in New Brunswick and in PEI, occasionally being in Halifax as well, but that has taken a pause while we work through the current pandemic. And that's okay, but I certainly wish that I was with you in person tonight, but being here virtually is what we can do for now. Hopefully you can all hear me well this evening. I am here at my home in New Brunswick, and I've got a 4-year-old around here somewhere with his mother, so if we have any unexpected visitors, my apologies in advance. So tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about a number of topics. And if you see me looking over here to my side, I apologize. That's just where my notes are in a 2-screen setup. But we'll talk about a number of topics that are all connected in my world by one thing in particular, which is risk. And more specifically to all of you, what you should know about flood, water, and weather risk. What governments are doing, and what you can do to mitigate your own risk, how we can increase our resiliency to weather and climate related events, and what we can do and looking forward. So we're going to talk about the environment a little, we're going to talk about climate change a little, and how those factors affect the investments that you make on your property. And finally, I'll hopefully leave you with some tips and suggestions on who you can talk to and where you can find some more information. It won't surprise you to know that we at the Insurance Bureau of Canada look at resiliency in terms of risk and the risks that consumers face because of severe weather damage, both now in the future, and what needs to be done to manage those risks and what you can do on your own. I think we can all agree that Mother Nature hasn't been extremely kind or forgiving lately, or predictable for that matter. On top of this, we're experiencing some interesting changes in our world, all while going through a global pandemic. So to say that there's a lot on our plates is likely a massive understatement. In this particular image that you see on your screens right now, this is actually from New Brunswick a couple of years ago, but I thought it was particularly pertinent to a talk about water, just to show as an example tonight. Flooding has become one of the unfortunate new normals in our world, and not just here where I am in New Brunswick, but also in PEI and in Charlottetown, in Nova Scotia, and we're seeing it across the country. Floods aren't anything new. They happen annually in many cases for many rivers across our country, but the magnitude of the damage and the frequency is certainly changing. So in this image, just in particular, this was from the 2018 floods here in New Brunswick. Some fast melting snow, some warming temperatures, some heavy downpours, all led to some significant widespread and long-lasting flooding here in my province. But we're not alone in this. Western portions of PEI in 2018 also incurred some significant water damage. The island experienced flood and wind damage after Hurricane Dorian in 2019, Hurricane Teddy last year. Although Teddy, thankfully, was downgraded to a tropical storm, it was still a significant event. It was one of those storms that I think everyone had prepared extremely well for, had planned for the worst, and then in the end, it didn't really amount to anything greater than what we would normally see during a hurricane season here in the Atlantic provinces, which is a good thing, but we don't always get let off so easy. So here in Atlantic Canada, we made out okay during last year's hurricane season, but that is particularly surprising considering the season that we had last year. Meteorologists currently are predicting another very active season for 2021, above average, but perhaps not quite as bad as last year's 30 named storm, which was frankly incredible. We will be as lucky to dodge that many this year. I hope so, but there's certainly no guarantees when it comes to weather. So it's no surprise that climate resiliency is more than just a collective buzzword in the environmental lexicon these days. For Canada's home, auto, and business insurers, climate resiliency, specifically related to our country's critical infrastructure, is a topic of keen interest. The reason for this interest is quite simple. And in my world, it has to do with the pronounced connection between insurance and climate change and cost. Nearly 30 years ago, insurers around the world began to see firsthand the effects of our changing climate by way of rising claims costs due in part to more severe weather happening more frequently. The very things that climatologists have been sounding the alarm about, more and or larger storms, more hurricanes, greater temperature fluctuations, insurers began to track and to quantify in dollar amounts based on more insured and greater insured losses from weather-related events. So here's a good look at the last 35 years. So these would be insured catastrophic losses in Canada. These would include water and also property damage. I'll narrow this down a little bit in the next slides to water specifically. But what we see here are some very interesting trends. If you look to the left of the graph, those losses from 1983 to 2000 ran in the about $400 million annual average range. And then you look between 2011 and 2020, or 2001 and 2010, and we'd increased that annual average to around $612 million annually. And then if you look in the last few years, where we see some very, very significant changes, between 2011 and 2020, the average was 2.1 billion. So this is a very significant change over the last 37 years. And these changes and these insured losses are having extremely pronounced impacts on insurance, on infrastructure, on municipal and provincial and federal budgets. And so these are the types of things that we're looking at. A couple in particular here that stand out as fairly large bumps on the graph, just for our own conversation. In 1998, I believe much of what you're seeing there is probably the Quebec and Eastern Canadian ice storms. Of course, 2013, there was some significant flooding in Calgary. There was the Eastern Christmas storm that some of you may remember. I know in New Brunswick, there was many without power for well over a week. There was some significant flooding in Toronto that year. And then one of the big bumps here in 2016 would have been the wildfires in Alberta that had a very significant impact on Fort McMurray in particular. So this next slide here, we're looking at large catastrophic losses, now a bit narrower within Atlantic Canada. So these would include earthquake, of course, no major losses associated with earthquakes, although they are certainly becoming somewhat more frequent, especially in southern New Brunswick here. Nothing major yet, but rumblings in the last number of years have certainly increased. But more specifically, fire, hail, wind, water, ice, snow. So you'll see in 2003, some of you may remember Hurricane Juan. It was an extremely significant loss here, insurance-wise, in Atlantic Canada. And I believe, if I remember correctly from some of my figures, I believe that Juan alone was about $100 million worth of that overall, just over $200 million of damage. So that was an extremely major event. And then in 2019, you'll see, especially here in Atlantic Canada, some of the effects of Dorian, which of course PEI felt firsthand along with the rest of our maritime Atlantic partners. So now narrowing this down a little further again, these would be insured water catastrophic losses in Atlantic Canada. So some significant events. Of course, the numbers get a little bit smaller as we narrow in the scope of this, but the losses are still fairly significant over the region for very specific parts of claims. And then now we are looking at PEI alone. And so in 2003, of course, as I said earlier, was Juan. In 2013, there was a significant ice storm, a January storm. There was March flooding that I believe affected some fairly wide portions of Western Prince Edward Island. And while we don't have specific data for Charlottetown itself, the island isn't that large, as you know, and I know, I've been there many times. If you didn't personally experience damage in some of these events, chances are that you certainly know or are related to somebody who has. So what can we do as we're talking about resiliency and the increase in the frequency of some of these events? You know, can we buy electric vehicles? Of course we can. And I believe that Prince Edward Island actually has a very generous program right now. Can we install solar panels? Of course we can. And those are good things to do. You know, anytime that we can decrease and mitigate our footprint, those effects are going to last long term. So those will help in the longer term, but that won't change this year's hurricane season, and it won't change the effects of this year's hurricane season on your home or on your property. So we need to adapt, we need to become more resilient, and we need to change how we interact with our surroundings. So in recent years, thousands of islanders have experienced financial losses due to severe weather. As a maritime province, Prince Edward Island is acutely affected by climate change. The island is, of course, by its nature, an island. It's small, it's low-lying, and it's prone to severe weather when it hits our region. When floods and hurricane, wind, and weather happens, it can have a devastating impact on people and communities, and those impacts are projected to get more severe as time goes on. So the cost of weather events. This graph is, of course, speaking nationally, and I'll just explain what we're looking at here. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer estimated that by 2021, this year, so we have a very good reference to go back and look at the end of this year and see how close we were to being accurate, that weather events linked to climate change would cost the federal government an annual $900 million. So that's almost $1 billion in damage for climate change costs alone, just with the federal government. Add a pandemic on top of that, and you've got a recipe for some extremely tough number crunching that'll happen when budget time rolls around. So I think this is one of the reasons we're seeing an extremely heightened conversation about climate, especially as we go through this pandemic. The cost, about what we need to do in the next decade and decades to try and slow and hopefully reverse some of these trends. Canada is a great country, but these are extremely expensive events, and you know, when you look at a finite pool of dollars that governments, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, can use in their annual spending, you know, climate change and the way that we interact with our surroundings is certainly one of the areas where we can do something directly. Most of the damage we see, about 75% of the total here, is expected to be caused by floods alone. So that's water damage. In fact, water-related losses are by far the costliest and most common risk affected by Canadian homeowners. So while these graphs and statistics illustrate the financial impact of severe weather, they do not actually and fully capture, I think, one of the more important parts, but that's the human impact. Each surge in insurance claims, costs, or government payouts represents countless lives disrupted, precious possessions lost, and real human suffering, displacement, and the stress and the trauma that goes along with major weather events is very real and probably impossible to quantify overall. So what can we do? How do we, and I'm referring to all of us tonight, help to alleviate this disruption? How do we help residents and communities manage the increasing climate change risk? How do we encourage and facilitate resilience in our communities in Atlantic Canada and across the country? So we believe that it's a whole of society approach. Insurers recognize that they have a unique role to play, but we see ourselves as partners along with governments and residents in a whole of society approach to managing risks brought on by our changing climate. Simply put, we all have a role to play in ensuring that everyone is prepared and protected. Insurers have a responsibility to provide the right products to help their customers manage and transfer their risks, and governments have a responsibility to make good policies to reduce systemic risks. And residents need to be informed so that they can take responsibility for improving their own resilience in their own homes. And this is truly where it starts for most of us. I may not be able to change the climate of the world, but I can certainly do my part here at my home and do my part to make sure that I'm prepared and that my family and my home is a resilient piece of the overall puzzle. So that includes knowing what the risks are and then doing something about it. So in the case of flood risk, this means better land use planning to keep residents out of harm's way. This has typically been a tough decision for many governments. Lands that abut or are near water are typically desirable for good reason. They typically carry a premium in price, and thus they, generally speaking, have a higher taxation rate. One doesn't have to look too far to see this. in downtown Charlottetown. Beautiful, beautiful downtown area. Wonderful buildings, wonderful businesses, very close to the ocean. And you know, if we see water level rising in the next 10, 20, 50 years, there may be impacts. Fredericton, similar situation. It is a floodplain. It floods year after year. There's beautiful neighborhoods, and people still want to live there, and as they should. But that comes with a cost. So strengthening and repairing our municipal infrastructure, tightening building codes, and utilizing natural wetlands and natural features are very effective and are cost effective. Cities everywhere are grappling with the increased costs from weather-induced events and are working to protect vulnerable neighborhoods. And those decisions are rarely easy ones. So we're going to look now at specifically at Charlottetown, and this is a flood risk profile. This is dated, so this may be somewhat changed now in 2021. This is from a 2015 study. But if we look at Charlottetown at a glance, there's approximately 10,000 in 2015, approximately 10,000 residential properties. 10% have some risk of flooding, which is below the national average of 19%. So that's a good thing. 500 of those homes would be at some risk of fluvial or river flooding. 100 would be at risk of a rainfall event, which would be caused by a low-lying area, and about 400 of those would be at some risk of both. Now, I don't have the addresses, so when we're done our presentation here and we're talking and doing questions, no, I don't know where each of these homes are, but chances are that if you live in a low-lying area and you see water pooling after major storms, you probably already know. This was, of course, based on modeling, and so it's. But I think it's a very good look at the community as a whole. So, what can you do to prevent water damage in your home? This is sort of the next part of this presentation this evening. We know that storms will continue to happen. We know that we will continue to see the effects of water and wind and weather-related events. So where can you start? And most typically, the best place to start is in your own backyard. So insurers and homeowners know that insurance products are based on financial risk. We recognize our responsibility to provide insurance products to consumers so that they can reduce their own risk. Since 2015, Canadian insurers have been broadening their suite of products to include overland flood insurance for residential property owners. And this wasn't always the case. Overland flood insurance is a relatively new product. Although the overland flood insurance is still moderately new in Canada, we are pleased to see that consumers are embracing this new option for reducing their financial risk. However, the reality is that those at the highest risk of flood won't always qualify for coverage. It's unlikely to be available or affordable to them. Insurers are pleased that governments are recognizing that there is a risk and a gap here. The federal government has created a task force whose mandate is to examine options for low-cost residential flood insurance to residents in high-risk areas. It will also consider options for potential relocation and for those who live in the highest risk of reoccurring flooding. But this will require collaboration with federal, provincial, municipal, territorial governments, and the insurance industry and others who are impacted and concerned by Canada's increasing vulnerability to flooding. And I'm actually going to skip past this slide right now, and if we have time at the end, we'll come back to it. But I just wanted to go over some of the basic elements of a homeowner's policy. And that last slide was actually some tips on preparing yourself for hurricanes. So we can go back to that at the end if we have time. But while we're talking about home coverage, I'll go over some of the basic elements. So most homeowners policies are based on a replacement cost basis, meaning if you proceed with the repairs, the insured will cover the approved full replacement cost, if that's what's in your policy, less your deductible. So you'll see at the top here, in the attic of this house, we have actual cost value, replacement cost value. Different policies will dictate this in different ways. Sometimes you may be given an option if you have a major loss as to whether you take an actual cash value, which would be a depreciated amount, or the overall replacement costs. And people will do this for a variety of different reasons. After a major event, they may decide that they want to do some of the repairs themselves. They may decide that they're not going to live there anymore. They may decide they want to rebuild differently. So your home insurance, of course, will include the foundation, the flooring, windows, doors, roof, walls. Usually, check your policy. Additional living expenses may be included if you have to move somewhere else for a time. But over here on the left of my screen, we see the optional coverages, and these are sometimes overlooked, and I think that they are important for homeowners to consider, and more importantly, important for homeowners to make sure that you're talking to your broker or to your insurance representative about. And so we see things like flood, sewer backup, replacement costs on personal property. Sometimes those are capped. Could be a condo deductible coverage. Maybe you have some art, a boat, or collectibles in your home. And all of these things may end up in the optional coverages. And so it's important to know when you look at your policy or when you're talking to your representative to know what's included in your policy, but also to know what's not included in your policy. And homeowners make decisions on that all the time. Maybe your house is full of art that you made or that is from families, and maybe it's difficult to put a price on. And maybe they are pieces in your home that you want to make sure are specifically covered in your policy. So we always encourage people when it comes to their homeowner's policy is to ask questions. You can never ask too many questions. Your insurance representative is there to answer them. So make sure that you understand what your policy and what your dollars that you're spending are covering. So important things for you to do. You want to make a list of what's in your home, and you want to make sure that you're sharing that with your broker so that they understand what it is you are insuring. Take pictures. We live in a world now where we all have a smartphone of some sort, well, probably, if not, a digital phone of some sort. Take pictures of what's in your house periodically, especially if it changes frequently. Make sure that you know about what you're entitled to if your home is unfit to live in for either a period of time or if it needs major repairs or a full repair. Make sure that you know what you're entitled to. And as I said before, review your policy carefully. Make sure that you understand what's in there. Make sure that your insurance representative understands what's in your policy as well. So overland damage, are you protected? There's a lot of things to consider here when we're talking about overland flood damage. These are costly events that happened. Water damage, which will come as no surprise, makes its way into every nook and cranny of your home, and it can be extremely expensive to clean up and to mitigate so that you can move back into your home safely. Sewer backup and water damage is costly for homeowners, it's costly for municipalities, it's costly for insurance companies. Fortunately, there are some steps you can take to protect yourself and your home and your property. Are you a snowbird? Well, probably not in the last 12 months, you may not be, but if you typically go south for the winter, some insurance policies require that you have a competent person check on your property on a routine basis if you're away from your home for more than 4 consecutive days in the winter. So speak with your insurance representative about specific policy requirements. Consider storing important documents and irreplaceable personal items away from flood-prone areas like your basement. Basements are a great place for us all to take things and forget about until the time comes when you want to make a list of what may be lost or was damaged in an event, and you realize that some of those important things were down on the bottom shelf. Don't store hazardous materials like oil, paint, certainly not hydrocarbon type materials in the basement when, if at all possible. In the event that there was basement flooding, they can leak, they'll float, they create a massive environmental hazard. And one of the main things you can do, and this may seem like a very simple suggestion, but many people do not know where their water main shutoff valve is located. I am currently in my basement, which is my work from home now. I can actually see the water shutoff valve from here, so I'm handy to it, which is great. But lots of people don't know where the main water shutoff is in their house. People do their own repairs. Sometimes a pipe will break. Being able to turn that off as quickly as possible can save you a lot of headache and can save you a lot of money in damages. So about backwater valves, this is a popular topic as of late, and I believe it was even a specific mention in an intact report for climate studies that Charlottetown came up in. But a backwater valve can help prevent sewage in an overloaded sanitary or storm sewer line from backing up into your basement. If you're on a municipal water system, these are important to have. The valve automatically closes if water or sewage backs up from the main sewer, so that helps keep it out of your basement. A properly installed backwater valve must be placed so that sewage backup will be stopped short of other water outlets in your basement, such as a floor drain, a sink, the toilet, showers, laundry tubs. It should also be positioned to allow easy access so that you can check, clean it to remove any material that may prevent the valve from operating properly. And the important, of course, caveat here is I'm talking to a municipal group with the city of Charlottetown is to check with your municipality before having a backwater valve installed. Make sure you understand what the codes are, make sure you understand what the bylaws are, and have it done by a licensed individual. So what can be done? And this is above and beyond just overland flooding, but what can we do to make ourselves and our communities more resilient? For starters, we can educate and empower people like we're doing today, and which it sounds like what many of you and some of you that have tuned into the previous speakers have been doing all along. This is a wonderful speaker series that Alistair and the city has set up. We can educate ourselves and each other about the risks associated with floods and the measures that we can take to protect ourselves. And we can educate governments about the steps they can take to protect homeowners and infrastructure. Adaptation measures generally outweigh the costs of doing nothing by almost 6 to 1. And this is very important. So the cost of doing something outweighs the cost of doing nothing by almost 6 to 1. And that's significant to government coffers, and it's significant in turn to your tax dollars, and it's significant to your personal dollars. We can improve our land use planning, specifically zoning restrictions that discourage or better forbid building on floodplains or areas at high risk of coastal flooding to reduce future losses. We have models now, governments have models now where they can predict where trouble spots are going to be in the future. So now is the time to decide that these areas probably aren't fit for the next 100 homes to be built. But this has always been a tough decision for planners, for elected officials, for property close or abutting to waterways is valuable, it's desirable, and they tend to pay a premium for that. But these plots are also very difficult to insure and extremely expensive to protect from the changing climate. We can make targeted infrastructure investments in our communities so that spending is directed to include projects that include flood resiliency, whether it be coastal or overland or low-lying areas. We can improve our building codes by adopting new codes and standards to make homes, infrastructure, and communities more climate resistant. Resiliency should be added to building code objectives to help ensure that private homeowners are better prepared to withstand extreme weather. Backwater valves are a perfect example. Charlottetown as an individual city, it may not experience extreme overland flooding frequently, but will most experience one or two extreme rainfalls every year. So ensuring that a municipal infrastructure is able to withstand extreme events is critical, and is making sure the home is protected in those events if those systems are overwhelmed. We can share data. Governments can collaborate with insurers like us, and we do this, risk modeling organizations and other stakeholders to mutually provide access to updated mapping information. We can preserve and restore wetlands. Wetland preservation and restoration can help protect communities from the destructive effects of floods and can be cost effective. Wetlands and robust natural shorelines act as natural buffers from pounding surf and further inland like a sponge that can collect, hold, and release water naturally. So clearly, we have our work cut out for us to ensure that everyone takes an individual and a collective responsibility and has risk transfer mechanisms should collective mitigation efforts fail. At the federal level, great strides are being made on adaptation. Over the last few years, IBC has hosted industry roundtables at the Globe Leadership Summit for Sustainable Business with the Minister of Environment and Climate Change in attendance. IBC has also signed on to the United Nations Environment Program for Financial Institutions, and specifically the Principles for Sustainable Insurance Initiative, which represents Canadian insurers' efforts to stand alongside their international counterparts in their commitment to take action on climate change. So while the weather may be getting worse, collaboration between stakeholders is definitely getting better, which is critical. IBC is also working with the federal government and is co-chairing an industry task team, which is part of the Federal Task Force on Flood Insurance and Relocation, which is working to ensure every Canadian is able to obtain some type of overland flood coverage. And your province, PEI, is participating in this task force, and there'll be a good voice there. More and more governments are recognizing the broader role that insurance and insurers play in climate resiliency. So I hope some of this has given you a better idea on what you should know as a homeowner, on the types of things that you can be asking not only your insurance representative, but also your municipal and provincial and federal representatives as well. I think that climate change and the impacts it will have on whether it's your personal property or your community, we know that it is going to have an increasing impact as time goes on, but we can take steps now to mitigate the impact and adapt personally in your own property, but also calling on our elected representatives to make sure that our municipalities and our provinces and our country are able to tackle those as well. So that's my chat for tonight, and happy to take questions or have a discussion.
All right, thanks so much for that very informative talk. It's great to hear about the actions we can take as with our insurance and just in general. So if anyone does have any questions or comments or any topic they'd like to hear Graham discuss in further details, please just leave it in the chat there and we can address it. I think it's definitely a very important topic when we're thinking about ourselves here. Charlottetown as a smaller municipality compared to some larger cities, and especially how much of our, as we've heard kind of in previous weeks about the climate change and the risks of that are posed by sea level rise, storm surges, and just being a coastal city that's pretty low lying. It's certainly a lot to think about, and it's good to hear the role of what insurance has and will play in that.
Well, and I think important aspect too, I just mentioned it, but the National Task Force on Flood Insurance Relocation, it won't just be for those areas that get, annual river flooding like we have here in New Brunswick. That's going to happen every year forever. But it will also include and look at things like coastal erosion and coastal flooding. So I think that's probably going to be a great thing and a critical look for a place like Prince Edward Island. Because while you may not have any massive rivers that experience annual floods, you are completely surrounded by water, which is something I don't need to remind you of. But I mean, in some ways, we Nova Scotia almost is now. If you looked at the Isthmus of Chignecto, that's a fairly low-lying area. Cape Breton Island would be no different. Newfoundland, but PEI, I think in particular, where it is such a low-lying, predominantly sand and sandstone-based structure in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, it's particularly prone to erosion and damage. So it.
So I just got someone sent a direct message to me asking a question here. What's the best way to find out if you have a backwater valve? And maybe I'll just add to that, how expensive, if you know, would it be to purchase and install a backwater valve? And I will say I've heard of recently some homes experiencing flooding here in Charlottetown from sewer backups. So it does happen here.
Yeah. Look, I don't want to put a dollar figure out there. They're not prohibitive in terms of, it's not like putting a roof on your home. But I would suspect probably parts and labor, you could be, I don't want to say a number because I don't know right off the top of my head, but, and how to check to see if you have one, I would have to think that if you're wondering, the chances are you may not have one. But certainly it could be one of those things that a call to a plumber would be able to tell you. I'm not sure if the municipality would have, and Alistair, you may know, but I don't know if the municipality would have any kind of a record of that, sort of at a corporate level, if you could check and see. But I suspect you probably have to have a plumber come in and give you an assessment.
Yeah, and I'm sure with that they could probably give you a quote for that. Don't believe the city has any records for that. I do work a bit with the water and sewer utility, but it's not my primary role.
No.
But yeah, it's likely, since we usually just, once the water connection from the municipal system, after that we don't, it's not really the utilities kind of responsibility, so I don't believe they'd have records for that. And you might be able to see yourself just by checking the water lateral that would be in your basement.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think if you're asking that, it's likely you may not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd recommend, as you did, contacting a plumber for.
They're not as common. Yeah, they're not as common here in Eastern Canada as they have become in larger centers, where, of course, if you have a backup, it could affect a whole block of houses. But it's certainly something you may want to consider. And if you have a plumber or a professional come in and give you an assessment, they may be able to give you a better idea of the value that it would present to you.
Mm-hmm. And with the backwater valves, on that topic, so I don't believe you touched on it. Maybe, sorry, you did, but with illegal connections, there's oftentimes, it used to be just the way it was done, where they'd connect some pumps right up to the sanitary sewer, which use on a neighborhood scale. And if you have lots of people with these connections to the sanitary sewer, and you have their sump pumps all pumping the stormwater into the sanitary sewer, that can lead to just exceeding the capacity, and that's what leads to some of the backups. And that's why it's good to have those backwater valves. So if you are in your basement and you notice your sump pump is connected to the sanitary sewer, we recommend you have that fixed as well. Yes, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat. I'm trying to think if I have any comments. Oh, there's another one here. Is there any change in the total island coverage of PEI due to floods in the past? I'm not sure if I would be able to answer that, and I'm not sure if you have an answer to that.
Do you mean in the land mass, or
total land coverage? So I assume yes.
I'm not sure. I don't think I would be able to accurately answer that.
Mm-hmm, yeah, that's a very difficult one, and I'm sure that would require some very intricate modeling and to attribute it to flooding.
The number may exist, but I don't have it at the tip of my fingertips. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm. But yes, I guess that's another thing with coastal flooding. There can be significant erosion, especially here on PEI, just given our geology. Definitely erosion will be an issue with sea level rise and those increasing storm surges. Yeah.
And I guess just to repeat myself from earlier, I know that insurance is at times it can be Greek or Latin to many folks, and sometimes it seems like an intimidating document or an intimidating purchase. You get on the phone or you go to your broker. You kind of want to get in and out and find the lowest price and be done with it. But I would encourage everyone to ask questions. You pay for it like you pay for other things. Know what you're buying, know what it covers, and know how that policy, because it is a product, would affect you at a time when you wanted it. And so I always encourage people to do that, whether you buy through an agent direct with a company or you buy through a broker. Those folks are there to help you out, to help you understand what's in that policy, and I guess perhaps more importantly at times what isn't. Sometimes lots of people make assumptions about what's in their policy. Don't assume. You know, it is a product you're buying and paying for. It's there to protect you. It's there to cover you when you need it. So make sure that ask all the questions. There's no silly questions when it comes to your policy and your property. Make sure that you know what's being covered. I do have a couple of links here, Alistair. I think I can copy and paste these into the chat.
Yeah, and you can also, if you want to send me those, I can include them in the email. Just when I send out the recording to everyone. You can certainly post them now, but I can also include it in that email. Also, I did have kind of one question about alarms and just like moisture or water detecting alarms, and
Absolutely.
when people are going away on vacations, which hopefully we will be able to do soon. Is there when you have these alarms that now can just send you an alert right to your phone, do those do they qualify as like the same kind of monitoring as it would having someone going over and just checking up on your home?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we encourage people. I mean, you know, as I picked up my phone earlier, you know, everybody's got one of these now. There is a lot of technology available that certainly, you know, 5 years ago wasn't available. You can walk into a hardware store now and buy Wi-Fi cameras, Wi-Fi moisture detectors that'll send you an alert on your phone. These are all great things to let your broker or your insurance company know that you have installed in your home. Whether or not they would substitute, you know, kind of as a one-for-one for a person checking up on your home if you're away in the winter, I don't know. I would say that, you know, it's always best to have a set of eyes on your property to make sure that, of course, the devices are working properly, but also to see things firsthand. But it's absolutely worth checking with your broker or your insurer with as to what they would consider an adequate monitoring while you're away. But you may also find that there is some premium relief if you have items like that. You know, if you have a fire alarm that's directly wired to a monitoring company, those are great. If you have a water or moisture detector that's directly attached to an app on your phone that lets you know if you've got more than an inch of water in your basement, those are great too. And they, we have an ability to monitor our property now that we just didn't have 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So it's there's a lot of products out there. They cost money. You have to weigh those things, but there are options. But whether or not it be a one-to-one sort of person or video and a moisture detector, I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. It's just worth asking your insurer and just making sure you know for sure.
Yeah.
And I'll just give another call out for the last call out for any questions people may have. And if not, we are approaching that hour mark. So I'll just give it another couple seconds there and see. But if not, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And I'd like to thank everyone who took their time out of their probably busy lives and evenings to attend these last 5 sessions of the speaker series. And as I mentioned, the recording for this will be sent out. And if you did miss the previous presentations from this series of great speakers, they are available on the City of Charlottetown's YouTube page. And it looks like we don't have any more questions. So once again, thank you very much, Graham, and hope everyone has a great weekend.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. Hopefully the next time I speak to the City of Charlottetown, I'll be in Charlottetown. We've got a vacation booked for August, so I've got my fingers crossed that I can go over the bridge. But it was good to be with you virtually.
Yes.
Hopefully next time it'll be in person.
Yeah, it's looking positive. End of the marathon, as they say. But Yeah, have a good evening and thanks again.
No, thank you all, and we'll chat soon.
Bye.